our story on the life of Bach. We left off when he was fixing the organ, trying to, with his brother Christoph. So today we pick it up when Sebastian was 15 years old. He left his brother's home to look for a job. He traveled 200 miles on foot to the town of Lüneburg. There he attended school and became a member of the church choir. This was the beginning of many trips Sebastian would take during his life. He was always looking for the best music job he could get. Sometimes his music jobs came along with chores that weren't very pleasant. When he was 17 years old, Sebastian got a great job as a violinist in the royal court at Celle, Germany. But as part of the job, he also had to remove slop from the kitchen every morning. As he moved to different towns, working as a choir master, which is a person who leads the choir, he worked as a choir master, musician, or church organist. J.S. Bach learned more and more about music. Johann Sebastian Bach took side trips too. He wanted to listen to well-known organists and composers to get ideas for his own music. On one trip, he heard a famous organist named Dietrich Buxtehude play. Sebastian was inspired by Buxtehude's animated and imaginative music. Soon, Sebastian started creating new and exciting music in his own style. One of Bach's most famous organ compositions during this time is called Toccata and Fugue in D minor, the one I just played. This piece is filled with big, powerful sounds. It had an energy and force that had never been heard before. Many of J.S. Bach's mighty organ pieces have been known to cause church rafters and windows to shake. Johann Sebastian Bach was a very religious person. He belonged to the Lutheran Church. One important type of musical piece he wrote for church services is called a cantata. A cantata features mainly voices. It usually has a lead singer and a choir accompanied by an orchestra. J.S. Bach wrote hundreds of cantatas. In each one you can feel his love for God. These beautiful works were a very important part of the Lutheran Church service. Bach's cantatas usually used hymn tunes called chorales that most people knew and loved. In J.S. Bach's time, a church service could last for 5 hours or more. People depended on cantata music to keep them interested and awake. It wasn't long before J.S. Bach became well known for his remarkable talent as an organist and composer of church music. This made it easier for him to find better jobs. When Sebastian was working as an organist in the town of Mulhausen, Germany, he met and fell in love with Maria Barbara Bach, a distant cousin. Maria was happy to travel around with her husband and raise their family. In 1708, Sebastian got an excellent job in the court of Duke Wilhelm Ernst of Saxe-Weimar. Bach wrote some of his most important organ works there. Unfortunately, after a few years, Sebastian felt the Duke was becoming too bossy. He decided to take a new job at a friendlier court. And when the Duke heard about Bach's decision, he became angry and had Johann Sebastian Bach thrown in jail for a whole month. Being in jail was very depressing for Johann Sebastian Bach. He couldn't wait to get out and start his new job with Prince Leopold of Cothen, Germany. Sebastian and the prince got along very well. Sebastian composed mainly instrumental music for the prince. He also wrote the first book, The Well-Tempered Clavier, and the Little Organ Book. These keyboard works are still played by music students today. The Well-Tempered Clavier is the book that I played the Prelude from, and our jazz piece we heard today. After 6 happy years in Prince Leopold's court, things quickly changed for the worst. First, Sebastian's wife, Maria, died, and then the prince got married. And his new wife didn't care for music at all. Here we see Prince Leopold. And here we see the actual music that Bach wrote. Everything had to be handwritten. Soon the prince started losing interest in music too. Sebastian felt it was time to move on and look for another new job again. Before he left Prince Leopold's court, J.S. Bach wrote a set of his most famous and popular works called the Brandenburg Concertos. A concerto is a musical piece in which one instrument or a small group of instruments stands out from the rest of the orchestra. It's a good way for an excellent musician to show off his or her talent. In the Brandenburg Concertos, trumpets, violins, oboes, flutes, harpsichords, or cellos play along with a larger orchestra to make up some of the best feeling happy music ever. If you're in a grouchy or sad mood, these concertos are almost guaranteed to make you feel better. The Brandenburg Concertos are filled with beautiful musical sounds that are sometimes relaxing and peaceful and sometimes bursting with joy. You can almost imagine yourself being at a royal event in some duke or king's palace when you listen to these pieces. So pretend you're in the palace and you will hear this music. How would you act? Definitely, that's a very joyful one. In 1723, J.S. Bach accepted a job as director of music in the historic city of Leipzig, Germany. This was probably Sebastian's busiest time. He was responsible for composing and directing music for 4 churches, a school choir, a university choir, and any music the city might need for special events. Sebastian had remarried in 1721. His new wife's name was Anna Magdalena. Anna Magdalena and Sebastian ended up having 13 children, plus the 4 children from his first marriage. Sebastian was a very busy father, taking care of a large family. You figured it out? 17 kids. Here we see a picture of some of his family. Definitely kept him busy playing music. One of the many things Sebastian had to do every week was write down and make copies of the music that he had written for all the choir and the orchestra members. This was a really boring job and took a long time. But his wife, Anna Magdalena, and their children would often help out. As busy as he was, J.S. Bach always found time for his large family. He was a loving father and made sure all his children got good grades, learned to play musical instruments, and helped around the house. 4 of Bach's sons became famous composers. Wilhelm Friedemann Bach, Johann Christian Bach, C.P. E. Bach, which stands for Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, and Johann Christoph Friedrich Bach. Johann Sebastian Bach spent 29 years in Leipzig. He composed some of his greatest works there, including the Goldberg Variations. These keyboard pieces take you on an amazing sound trip. They start out peacefully, build to a swirling musical whirlwind, and drop you back off where things are nice and calm. Another piece from this time, the St. Matthew Passion, is filled with heavenly sounds and shows how Bach could put his deepest religious feelings into a work. And the joyful Christmas oratorio has some of the biggest and cheeriest trumpet and horn sounds you'll ever hear. Later in J.S. Bach's life, musical tastes began to change. People were growing tired of what they thought were big, complicated Baroque sounds. They wanted music that was simpler and lighter. Bach heard some of the latest music of the day in coffee houses around Leipzig, where college students and musicians traveling through towns sometimes played their popular music. Even though Johann Sebastian Bach knew things were changing musically, he decided to stick to his favorite Baroque style. Some people criticized him for being old-fashioned. In Leipzig, it seemed like Bach was always being given a hard time, especially from his bosses. J.S. Bach had dozens of bosses. Most of them had very little understanding of music. Bach always had trouble getting raises or money for necessary music equipment. Members of the town council thought Sebastian wasn't working hard enough. The principal of the church school thought music was a waste of time for his students. And the head of the university thought Bach was directing poorly. But Bach was important to his community in Germany. Here we see a statue with his name printed on it. Indeed, a wonderful musician. And in conclusion, Johann Sebastian Bach always stood up for his rights. He often ignored those silly complaints. And when he died in 1750, he had composed some of the world's most beautiful music ever, whether his bosses liked it or not. It's easy to hear Bach's great music. It's often played on the radio and classical music stations. There are hundreds of tapes and compact discs and records of his work too. Also, many neighborhood churches put on free Bach concerts throughout the year. In summary, I was reading in a magazine called Christianity Today, and it says, but music was never just music to Bach. Nearly 3/4 of his 1,000 compositions were written for use in worship. Between his musical genius, his devotion to Christ, and the effect of his music, he has come to be known in many circles as the fifth evangelist, meaning that his passion was so great for the Lord that the presence of God is felt in all his music. Thanks for listening to the life and music of one of the world's greatest composers. And until next time, my friends, peace, shalom, my friends.